Module 7 Being Prepared. Preparation serves several important purposes. It boosts your self-confidence, it reduces the chances of something going wrong, it creates an impression of you as a competent, diligent person, it makes it easier for you to give a polished, professional presentation. It is often said that those who fail to prepare to fail. The reason for this is that only by preparing properly will you eliminate the obvious potential errors that can turn what would be an excellent speech into a mess. By taking the time to prepare, you can look ahead to the presentation and get an impression for how it should and will go. It will also allow you to take into consideration what difficulties may arise and have a strategy for dealing with each of them. Some people can walk into a room and hold the attention of their audience by speaking off the cuff for half an hour or more. These people are naturally gifted and quite rare. Usually they make a living as stand-up comedians, as comedy is one of the very few fields where the act of preparing a routine is not hamstrung by the necessity for getting every fact right and every detail nailed down. This does not mean that delivering a presentation cannot be an enjoyable process. In fact, the right amount and the right kind of preparation can ensure that the presentation is enjoyable, informative, and useful both for you and for your audience. Checking out the venue. Here are some things to look for when checking out the venue for a presentation. Adequate seating. Good sight lines. Some chairs may need to be moved so that everyone can see the speaker or the screen. Projectors or other equipment. If you will be using the site's projector, be sure it works and check to see if it is compatible with your laptop. Will you need an extension cord? Lighting. What combination of lights will allow the audience to see you, their notes, and the screen if you plan to use slides? Speakers' accommodations. Is there a podium if you plan to use one? Is there a place for you to put handouts? Miscellaneous. Where are the restrooms and emergency exits? Sometimes a lot of preparation goes into a presentation, taking into account the way the speaker moves, sounds, and sees the audience, as well as the visual aids the speaker will use during the course of the presentation. A great deal of preparation should ensure that things go smoothly, but the level of presentation needs to be matched by the quality of preparation. Think for a moment how you would react if you had written a 30-minute presentation which called for frequent references to a visual slideshow, and when you arrived at the venue you found that they did not have a projector. If you can have access to the venue before you deliver the presentation, this should allow you to carry out a study of the room and get all the information you need. If you can have access for long enough to do a dry run, so much the better, as this will allow you to foresee any problems and either amend your speech or make alternative arrangements. It is essential that you take nothing for granted when seeking to deliver a presentation, because it will be you who is in the unenviable position of explaining and dealing with any problems that happen during the live presentation. If you cannot get access to the venue prior to your presentation, then you should at least be able to get a floor plan of the venue and a checklist of items you will have available to you, as well as knowing whether the venue will support any equipment you bring with you. If you have written into your presentation a very clever 10-minute scenario that requires you to walk among the audience, you will need to know that the layout of the room allows this. If you have included a short film in your presentation, it will be entirely useless if most people cannot see the film because a pillar is in their way. Then, before you deliver your presentation, you should look around the room and ensure that nothing there will distract people from what you are saying, and visualize how you will deliver your speech in this room. Gathering materials. If you are going to use handouts, be sure you have enough. Handouts serve several purposes. Listeners like to take notes. Listeners like to have something to take away from your presentation as a reminder of what you said. Many listeners will take notes on any scrap of paper that is handy. By providing your listeners with handouts, you can reduce the time they spend taking notes because they will already have the main information you are presenting. The less time they spend taking notes, the more time they can spend focusing on you. Handouts help reinforce your main points. People listen selectively. As hard as you try to emphasize a particular point, some listeners will remember some other point you made that was probably less important. Handouts will help you drive home your main message. Handouts make listeners happy. People like to take away something tangible from a presentation, something more than their recollection of what you said. Giving people handouts makes them feel as if they own the information they have just heard. When you write your speech, it is beneficial to condense what you are saying into its key points. This is beneficial for the sake of having visual prompts for what you are going to say, but can actually serve a dual purpose. If you condense a speech into its key points and other useful information, then in this form or in a slightly amended one, it can make an excellent handout. As wonderful as your speech may be, remember that it will be experienced slightly different by however many people hear it. All of these people may take something slightly different away from the room, So if you have absolutely concrete points that you would insist on them remembering, ensure that these are available on the handout. By giving everyone a handout, you also ensure that they feel as though they have participated in the presentation. Rather than simply demanding that they sit there, listen, and remember everything you have said, you give them what is in effect a souvenir of the occasion. In fact, souvenir is by origin a French word for to remember. This will be something they can refer back to after the event, particularly if they annotate the handout themselves with their own thoughts or something specific that you said during the presentation. Additionally, this allows them to sit and listen to your presentation as you deliver it, without having to constantly write and refer back to detailed notes during the speech. A 24-hour checklist. Presentation. Do you know what you're going to say in the first 2 minutes? Do you know how you're going to introduce your topic? Have you prepared clear statements of your main points? Do you know how you're going to close the presentation? Have you prepared answers for the questions that are likely to come up? Slides and handouts. Have you proofread your slides? Do you need to add any slides? Should you delete any slides? Do you have enough handouts for everyone? Logistics. Do you know where you're going and how you're going to get there? Have you gathered all the equipment and other materials you need? Have you called a contact person to make sure the room will be ready?
Cindy looked over at her co-presenter, Steve. "Steve, are you okay?" Steve turned to her and said, "Yeah, I thought that going to see the venue where we would present would make me feel calmer. Instead, it brought up all these questions, like, do we have enough slides in our presentation? Have we outlined all of our points clearly? It really made me start to feel anxious." Cindy asked, "Well, do you have a checklist?" Steve answered, "I have some for day-to-day work life, but none for the presentation." Cindy said, "I'll email you a checklist I use all the time that goes over what is needed for presentation, handouts, and logistics." Steve read over the checklist that Cindy sent him, and he used it to help himself relax and get ready for the presentation.
Module 8, Overcoming Nervousness. It's okay to be nervous. In fact, it's probably a good thing. If you are very calm before a presentation, you may be underestimating the difficulty of your assignment. If you're calm because you consider the topic an easy one, a no-brainer, you may not project enough interest in your subject. If you're not nervous, you may have a hard time projecting the energy and enthusiasm that you will need to win your listeners' attention. Nervousness can be a tool to communicate enthusiasm. Channel your nervousness by forcing yourself to speak clearly and to make eye contact with your listeners. It cannot be stressed too often that the element of balance is important in delivering a speech. Come across as too relaxed and you will sound a little bit bored. If you are bored, then the audience will expect to be bored as well, and they will need very little excuse to start mentally running through other things that they have to do later on that day. Conversely, if you come across as too nervous, they will wonder why you are giving the presentation rather than someone competent. Also remember that although eye contact with your audience is good, staring at them will just make them apprehensive, or worse yet, amused. A visit from the boss. Suggested responses to statements from the boss. "I know you're going to do a great job on this presentation." "Thanks, I'm ready to go." "This is a very important presentation, are you ready?" "I've spent a lot of time preparing, I think it will go well." You might run into some strong opposition in this meeting. "I've thought about the objections people might have and I've prepared responses." "Do you think you can handle this presentation?" "I know what I'm going to say and what kinds of questions people will have. I'm ready." Sometimes, even the best bosses have a tendency to put pressure on you when they would swear that they are simply trying to help you. Words of encouragement may well feel as though they are loaded with other meanings. To a nervous presenter, a phrase like, "I know you're going to go out there and give a great presentation," seems to be silently followed with, "I know this because if you don't, I'm going to fire you at the first opportunity." This may not be what was meant, but nervousness does not always follow a logical path. Should your boss deliver any of the above phrases of encouragement, leave aside for the time being any other means that they may have had. Accept their words of encouragement and allow your boss to see that you have prepared well for the speech and anticipate that you may run into some opposition. As part of your preparation, you will have included your responses to any difficulties that you anticipate. Allow then for them to remain at the back of your mind. If you go into a presentation on the defensive, then you will find it very hard to win approval of your audience and may even appear paranoid. Nervousness can be energy. If it is appropriate, you may even refer to how nervous you feel and ask the audience to be gentle with you. The work of your presentation has already mostly been done. What you are doing now is merely its culmination. So remember that you know what you're talking about, You know what you will say, and you have every right to say it. Preparing mentally. Some advice for participants on mental preparation. Like an athlete preparing for a big game, you need to keep yourself positive as you prepare for your own important contest. Think of all your successes in life, all the worthwhile things you have done. Remind yourself that you have prepared for this presentation, that you know what to expect. Think about similar experiences you have had. How have you responded in similar situations in the past? If you're like most people, your feelings of anxiety will gradually go away as you work your way through your presentation. You have probably been through things like this in the past, an initial period of nervousness and anxiety that lasts only a short time. In so many cases, the anticipation of an event is the most emotionally charged part of it. The athlete analogy is a good one. If you allow yourself to think too much about the bad things that might happen, it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Do not go into the meeting or conference room with a sense of foreboding and a strategy of damage limitation. All that this will do is invite problems which do not need to be there. You have already done most of the work. Actually, delivering the presentation is no more than the final 10%. Once you are in the zone, momentum will take you to the end. What many people actually do, and it is something that can be destructive if you allow it to be, is anticipating being nervous. The more you think, oh, the nerves are going to get me, the more they will. Accept that nerves are a part of public speaking and channel those nerves into making your speech come alive. Anyone who claims not to have been nervous the first time they spoke in public is almost certainly lying. It is something that is very hard to pre-imagine accurately, and in most cases, the nerves dissipate after the first few minutes. Accept that you will be nervous and concentrate on delivering a good presentation. You will learn to love those nerves. Physical relaxation techniques. 2 relaxation techniques. Deep breathing. Sit up straight, cross your legs at the ankles, or keep your feet flat on the floor. Take a long, slow breath in through your nose. Pretend that you are breathing into your abdomen. Allow your abdomen to expand. Exhale slowly and evenly through your nose. As you exhale, allow your abdomen to go in. Continue to breathe in this way for 5 to 10 breaths. Progressive relaxation. Tense a group of muscles so that they are as tightly contracted as possible. Hold them in this state of extreme tension for a few seconds. Relax the muscles as you normally would. Consciously relax your muscles further so that you are as relaxed as you can be. Appearing confident in front of the crowd. Personal organization, notes, visual aids, and handouts. A speaker who fumbles around with his materials gives an impression of poor organization and lack of interest. The audience suspects that such a speaker hasn't put much effort or thought into preparing for the presentation. Allow yourself enough time to organize all your materials before you begin your presentation. Being well organized can also improve your self-confidence. Remember that there is no reason for the people in the audience to feel anything but well disposed towards you. Even if they may not agree with what you have to say, as long as you do not say it confrontationally, they will accept your right to say it. One of the most famous strategies to deal with nervousness when addressing an audience is to picture them all in their underwear. However, this is more a joke than a serious strategy. Those who have seriously tried it have found that it distracted them more than anything else. It is much better to simply look out into the audience, smile in a relaxed way, and introduce yourself. The chances are that many of your audience will smile back, and you can then address parts of your speech in their direction in order to feel supported. The most important thing to remember in order to deliver the most confident presentation you can is to have an awareness of your surroundings. If you move around, bear in mind the positioning of things in the room. If you walk into something, pass it off with a brief joke about people planting things to put you off your stride, and simply allow your speech to flow.
Peter met with his manager, Diane, to prepare for his presentation. He asked, "Is it normal to be quite nervous before a presentation?" Diane said, "I think most people experience some stage fright from time to time." She asked, "What do you do to decrease your nervousness?" Peter had to think for a moment. "I try not to think too negatively. I try to remind myself that there's no reason for the audience to be anything but well-disposed towards me." Diane nodded. "Those are some good ideas. Have you ever tried deep breathing exercises?" "Not really," Peter said. "Are they helpful?" "Very," Diane answered. "Let me make you a copy of a handout on deep breathing exercises for you." Peter practiced deep breathing the night before the presentation and felt noticeably less anxious and gave an excellent presentation.
Module 9, Delivering Your Speech, Part 1. A few simple steps can help you improve the delivery of your presentation. Start off strong by preparing an opening that will capture the audience's attention. Learn how to use visual aids effectively. Check the volume of your voice. Practice beforehand to check running time, but not to the point where it is automatic. As long as you have the confidence to use the room to your advantage and have your ideas straight in your head, the presentation really will take care of itself for most of the time. You will find that simply through saying it and hearing it often enough, your speech will evolve to a point where you can make slight adjustments on the spot and where necessary without it becoming confusing. Starting off on the right foot. The opening of a presentation has two purposes: to capture the audience's attention, to introduce the subject of the presentation. The opening should be very brief, in most cases 1 to 2 minutes. In that short span of time, you need to present yourself and your topic in a way that will make your audience want to pay attention. In planning your opening, go back to your analysis of your audience. An effective opening convinces your audience that what you are going to say will be worth their time and attention. If you lose them in the first 2 minutes, there is not much you can do to get them back with you. In some ways, the presentation's most important element is its introduction. There are many things you can do to catch the audience's attention. Taking into account that a presentation is generally a quite formal setting, this number is maybe slightly reduced in terms of what you can do to catch the audience's attention and keep your job. However, if you work on getting the opening right, you will find that your presentations receive the attention they deserve, and that you will be able to hone them to the point where you become a very skilled presenter. It is worth opening with a bold statement. The statement may be controversial, to the extent that it is something you believe and that some in the audience may disagree with. Controversy, in this case, is more to do with slight differences of opinion than saying something which will offend people. But it is fine to open with a statement along the lines of, X is something which is absolutely essential to the running of a business, where X stands for something that, up to now, many people may not have agreed was essential. Follow this up by saying, I know many of you may not agree with me, but this is what I plan to prove to you here and now. Making a statement which requires backing up will draw the attention of the audience, as they listen in to see how you will back it up. You will also have introduced your subject and can then follow up with a few lines about how opinions have differed on the subject, but people with more years in the business than you have had very positive, complimentary things to say about it. In some cases, it may be beneficial to write the opening statement for your presentation after you have written the rest of it, as this allows you to make your statement chime with what you are going to say. Using visual aids. Visual aids are able to clarify data that may be difficult for the audience to grasp from a verbal presentation alone. Charts and graphs are especially helpful for this purpose. Highlight your main ideas. Help your audience remember your main ideas. Many studies have shown that an audience remembers the main points of a presentation longer if the speaker uses visual aids. Signal transitions between major sections of your presentation. Shorten meetings. If handled properly, visual aids can shorten meetings by allowing the speaker to spend less time clarifying and repeating the main points of the presentation. One study has shown that presentations that include visual aids are more persuasive than presentations that do not. There is some dispute over whether the use of visual aids is simply a gimmick to cover the fact that a presentation does not say very much, an accusation of style over substance, and there are certainly cases where this happens. But the coherent use of visual aids will make a presentation more memorable to the audience and will allow the presenter to make his or her points more completely. Getting it right can be difficult, but if you get it right, the payoff can be huge. Try to avoid simply copying the visual aids you have seen used before. If you have seen them, then the chances are that your audience will have seen them too. If they were successful, then the audience will be prone to think back to that presentation and either ignore yours or constantly compare the two. If they were unsuccessful, then it is unlikely that they will suddenly have become more effective. It is best to think of visual aids after you have written the presentation, as this will allow you to think of a coherent uniting factor between the elements you wish to illustrate. If you can think of a visual aid that can be used interactively, then so much the better. One obstacle which presenters find they run into is the difficulty of saying something that has not been said before, or in a way in which it has never been said. By achieving this, you will create a situation where your audience will refer back to your presentation as, "Remember the time when?" Having this kind of memorable impact can make your presentation a lot more effective. It should, however, not be all that people remember. Over-reliance on visual aids will simply lead to your broader message falling on deaf ears. Checking the volume of your voice. The more people there are in a room, the louder you will have to speak. People make noise unintentionally by moving around in their seats or shuffling papers. If you find that you have to shout to make yourself heard in the back of the room, then you need a microphone. Overall, though, conference rooms tend to be built in order to allow a presenter's voice to carry. The difficulty of getting your voice to just the right volume for a presentation is made by the fact that there are multiple rows of people viewing the presentation. In this case, it is important to take account of the seating arrangements. Before you say anything else in a presentation, it may be a good idea to ask, in the voice you intend to use for the presentation, whether everyone can hear you clearly. The element of balance is again important here. Speakers who are too quiet will have the obvious disadvantage that their listeners genuinely cannot hear them, as well as the fact that they will appear nervous and not in command. This does not excuse going too far in the opposite direction, which will lead people to consider you brash and overconfident, and either consciously or subconsciously gives less weight to your views. Shouting distorts the voice, and it is a simple fact that something which is shouted will not be heard as clearly as something of a similar length which is spoken powerfully from the middle of the chest. Also bear in mind that if you plan to move around the venue, you will need to make adjustments at times to ensure that your voice carries the extra distance.
Russell sat through another presentation. He had gone to so many in the past week that they were all starting to blur together. The speaker stepped up to the front of the room. Russell prepared himself for yet another boring meeting. The presenter said, "What's the most embarrassing things your kids have ever said out loud?" Russell perked up, as did the rest of the audience. The presenter smiled and said, "There are some things we will always remember, whether we want to or not. In a similar way, your memory can work for you to help your clients, your sales numbers, and yourself." The rest of the presentation was just as great as the opening. Russell found out the name of the presenter so that he could sign up for other trainings offered by the same person.
Module 10, Delivering Your Speech, Part 2. During the course of a presentation, you need to be aware of how things are going. Are people starting to lose interest? Do they need a break? Do you need to do something different to change the pace? When it's time to wrap up your presentation, you need to remind people of your basic message. You hope that a week from now, if someone asked the members of your audience, they would be able to recall what your presentation was all about. This is something that depends greatly upon the audience, but as you have no control over their reactions, your job is simply to ensure that you get your message across as persuasively as you possibly can. You will probably be given an allotted time to deliver your presentation, and it is a good idea to take this time and look at all the elements you need to cover. By doing this, you can then divide the allotted time into shorter spells in which you can cover the topics in hand. Adjusting on the fly. Here are some adjustments you could make if the audience seemed to be losing interest. Ask questions. Have a member of the audience come to the front of the room and help you with a demonstration. Conduct an informal poll. How many people think that? Introduce a brief, interesting digression. Go off topic for 2 to 3 minutes. Use a brief anecdote, preferably one that has something to do with your topic. Each of the above adjustments has the advantage of offering a change of pace, and if your audience has given the appearance of losing interest, these can turn that around by reminding the audience that there is a reason for them to listen. Some audiences react to different things than others, and you will normally be able to tell what it is that your presentation lacks by reading the faces of your audience. If they look slightly pained and confused, it may be that you are speaking from a vocabulary with which they are unfamiliar. If they simply look bored, then it may be that you are not telling them anything new. Involving the audience is something which, done carefully, can get a presentation right back on track when it has been threatening to lose their attention. For something as simple as not wanting to be called up to the front and exposed for their failure to pay attention, to something as enjoyable as the ability to participate in a genuinely interesting diversion. This will cause people to sit forward and become more interested in proceedings. It may also be that you have been speaking excessively formally and have appeared distanced and humorless. Obviously, a lot has gone into this presentation and you may well consider it to be no laughing matter. But a certain lightness of touch can make the presentation flow better and involve the audience more. It is wise to avoid disrespectful humor, but some light self-mocking can go a long way to getting the audience on your side. Gauging whether breaks are required. When you tell people to take a break, tell them exactly when you plan to start again. 15 minutes is a typical length for a break. The shorter presentations, those under an hour, will generally not require a break. But if the presentation edges towards an hour and a half, it may well be that offering a break in the middle can be the wisest thing to do. Although people will sit for upwards of 2 hours in a movie theater, there is a clear difference between a movie and a presentation. Atmospherically, dynamically, and in many other ways, it is much easier to sit through a film of a certain length than it is to sit through a presentation of the same length. If you do give a break to the audience at a presentation, it is essential to specify that you will begin the presentation again at a set time and impress upon them the importance of their being back at the right time. If people stay out beyond the allotted time for a break, then it simply results in the recommencing of the presentation being delayed and gives a very bad impression. If there are some stragglers who take a little bit more time to arrive back, then it is beneficial to simply have a short, informal conversation with the people who have arrived on time or stayed in the auditorium during the break. This can be a good way of gauging how the presentation is being received and allow you to get an impression for what your audience is like. Wrapping up and winding down. Sometimes a speaker will end a presentation with a question and answer session. If you do this, don't end the presentation with your answer to the last question. It might have little to do with your main point. Instead, after you have answered the last question, say something like, "That's all we have time for. If there's one thing I hope you will remember from this presentation, it's..." Doing this will end the presentation in a neat way and pull together the strands of the previous period of time. It will also allow you to reinforce the central point of your presentation. As people leave, thank them for attending and say goodbye to them. If people leave the presentation on a positive note, they are more likely to remember what has gone before in a positive light. Whatever else you do, you should ensure that if people have follow-up questions after the event, they can address them to you in whatever way is possible.
Christina reached the end of her question and answer session. She saw that a few participants were gathering their things. She thought, "Oh no, did I accidentally give them the cue that the presentation is over?" Christina had to think quickly on her feet. She cleared her throat and said, "If I could just leave you with one thing that I hope you will remember from this presentation." Christina blanked for only a moment, and then she remembered that, if possible, presentation should come full circle and end with the same point made in the beginning. She smiled. It would be that in order to analyze, prioritize, and energize, you need to, the crowd said, optimize. Christina grinned. Exactly. Thank you for coming. All her hard work had paid off. The presentation ended successfully.
Module 11, Questions and Answers. The way you respond to questions will have a major effect on what kind of rapport you are able to build with the audience. If you answer questions thoughtfully and respectfully, people will feel that you are taking them seriously. If you give flip, dismissive answers, people will feel that you don't have time for them. People may ask questions which are not 100% serious, but even then you should not be dismissive. Simply take the question in the spirit it was intended and take the opportunity to display a sense of humor. Questions may well be an opportunity for you to get information into the presentation that you could not address due to overall time constraints. When someone asks a good question, begin your response with a sentence along the lines of, "That's a very good question, I'm glad you asked me that." I think the most important thing here is that if someone asks a question which you find either you cannot answer or which is difficult, do not simply say, "I don't know," but say, "That's a good question. I have to admit I haven't covered that issue. What do you think?" This way you will not lose respect, but will allow discussion to flow more freely. Ground rules. At the end of your presentation, you say, "Does anyone have any questions?" And no one does. What do? You could try waiting for 20 seconds or so and then say, "Well, one question people often ask is..." Come up with your own questions to show people what kinds of questions you expect. Note, the questions you come up with should be an easy one so people will get the idea that they don't have to ask something very complicated or difficult. If the presentation is longer than an hour, it is beneficial to allow questions at regular intervals. This is because the longer people are sat in silence, the less interest they will show in whatever is at hand. However, most presentations will be shorter than that, and it is advisable to hold off questions until the end. If you have an hour in total for the presentation, you should look to wind down at the 45-minute mark and take questions in the last 15 minutes. This will allow you to answer questions and look for feedback on those answers. An open question and answer session will enliven matters with more group participation. It will give everyone a chance to participate in a way which will reinforce what they hopefully have learned. Answering questions that sound like an attack. Responding to hostile questions. At some point, someone in your audience might ask a question that sounds like an attack. How should you respond? Don't confront the person. Don't say, "No, I think you're wrong." Affirm the person. Say, "That's an interesting point, but here's another way to look at it. I can see why you would feel that way, but I was trying to make the point that..." Point taken. I might have been too sweeping in my generalization. Everyone in the room will be waiting to hear how you respond to the challenge. If you keep cool and say something positive before you proceed to your answer, you will impress your audience with your professionalism and your command of the situation. Agree with a person as far as you can. State your disagreement in a non-confrontational way. I think we agree on XYX, but not on ABC. Answering hostile questions with an equally hostile response will simply make the whole process tense. As you are the person at the front of the room and the person asking the question is sat with a number of other people, it will simply set you against the larger group of people, making the atmosphere needlessly confrontational. Additionally, if you answer a hostile question by showing good grace and considering the question on its positive merits, You will increase the likelihood of the initially hostile individual backing down from their confrontational position, whether through embarrassment for their unnecessary hostility, or because they were impressed by you looking to answer their question fairly, despite the fact that it could have been taken as an attack. It should be clear that you are not a teacher to the group of people, but some of the principles of teaching remain intact. Among these, the fact that you are in a position of some responsibility and importance should prevent you from allowing yourself to have a pop back at the person. Dealing with complex questions. Listen. Listen attentively to the question. Make eye contact with the questioner. Nod or give other indications of encouragement. Don't interrupt. Paraphrase when appropriate. If a person asks a long rambling question, you might want to paraphrase it before you respond. Say something like, "Let me be sure I understand you. You are asking." Analyze. Before responding, make sure you understand the question. Try to determine the intent of the questioner. Is he genuinely asking for clarification, or is he trying to disprove or challenge you? Watch facial expressions and body language. Listen for tone. Ask yourself, is there a broader issue behind the question that I need to address? Affirm. Make eye contact with the questioner again. Say something like, "That's an interesting point," or "I'm glad you brought that up." An affirmation of this kind is especially important if the question was asked in a challenging way. Answer. Don't duck a question or give a vague answer. If you don't know the answer, say so. You might want to tell the questioner that you will call him the next day with an answer. Give an honest answer. If the audience gets the impression that you are trying to put one over on them, you might as well pack up and go home. The question and answer session traditionally comes at the end of the presentation. So if you shine during this section, people will remember that very clearly, as they will surely remember you negatively if you duck questions or give fraudulent answers. Ending on a positive note is hugely important in a presentation, and if you can do that, you are most of the way to being a good public speaker.
Theo had been dreading the question and answer segment. There was one participant, Paris, who had been mumbling under her breath, giving other participants side glances and huffing at points he had made. He wasn't surprised when she was the first one to raise her hand with the question. When called upon, Paris said, "You say that all customer service representatives must rely on their listening and de-escalation skills. What if you have someone brand new who hasn't acquired those skills yet? Then, what do you do?" Theo took a deep breath and said, "Point taken. I might have been too sweeping in my generalization. In that case, it really becomes a training question." Theo answered her question honestly and to the best of his ability. This allowed for a smooth transition to the next question that was raised.
Although this workshop is coming to a close, we hope that your journey to improve and apply the skills that you learned is just the beginning. Please take a moment to review and update your action plan. This will be a key tool to guiding your progress in the days, weeks, months, and years to come. We wish you the best of luck.